Hello and welcome. You're about to watch Bereavement and Other Losses as part of the Wellbeing Education Resilience programme. We'd like to draw your attention to the Face COVID video by Russ Harris. If you haven't already seen it, please do take 5 minutes to do so at some point. It gives a great overview of how to support wellbeing in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. You can click on the link below of the accompanying PowerPoint presentation when it's in slideshow mode.
This is the fourth video in the Watch element of the WER programme. It focuses on bereavement and other losses. There may be key concepts that are touched upon very briefly in this video that are explained more detail in the concept index video. These are marked with a blue star with CI in the middle. Should you want any further information or have any questions on anything covered in this webinar, you can book onto one of our Q&A conferences.
The Bereavement and Other Losses section of the WER programme is split into 4 parts. This slide shows you which part you're about to watch and also lists the other parts in case there are any other aspects you would like to find out more about.
Within this webinar, the following topics are covered: understanding of death and different ages, considerations for children and young people who have certain life experiences or special educational needs when supporting them with loss and bereavement. If you see this symbol with a thought bubble and activity in the middle, please pause the video if you wish to take time to do the suggested activity or reflection. Whilst watching this video, please be kind to yourself and pay attention to how you are feeling throughout. Should you wish to take a break and pause the video, please do so. You may also wish to reach out to a friend or a family member. If you want to seek further support, there is information of how you can do so on the final slides. Alternatively, you could contact your school's mental health lead and they could put you in touch with your allocated practitioner from the school wellbeing service. So this slide is looking at how children under the age of 5 understand death and how we can help them to understand what's going on. So final and forever means very little to children at this age, as does the idea of dead. To them, that person is just less alive. They don't understand that actually they're not going to see this person again. Death and life are interchangeable. So, yep, again, they might be dead 1 minute, but they may still expect to see them again next week. Emotional state is bound up with that of the significant adults in their life. So this is about the fact that children will take the lead in terms of how they should be feeling and behaving from their parents. And while we don't want you to hide exactly how you're feeling from your children, because it's important that they do see emotion and they do see appropriate times to have appropriate emotions, it's really important to keep your day as normal as possible, keep to your routines as much as you can, but be very clear to them that you are sad at the moment and things might be a little bit different for them. Seeing adults distressed can be frightening for them if it is not spoken about and needs acknowledging and explaining. So this is exactly what I was just saying. If you're really upset and crying a lot, that will make them distressed. They need to see that you are a little bit sad, and you need to explain to them very clearly about, I am sad at the moment, this is why. But they also need to see that it's okay and things are still normal to an extent, in the sense that life is still going on, you've still got your routines, etc. So how to help under 5 years. So these are things that you need to be prepared for in order to support a young person under 5 with bereavement. So be prepared for their blunt talking and their very matter-of-fact way of talking, their very matter-of-fact questions they may ask you, or quick change from them in terms of sort of behaviours and when you're having these conversations. Evidence of lack of forever understanding. For example, she'll be here for my party. So you may think that they've sort of grasped that idea that they're not coming back, then all of a sudden they'll expect that person who's died to be there next week. discussing the idea of gone forever, retelling the loss repeatedly. So it will take lots of times and lots of repetition of reminding them that this person is gone forever, and reminding them about what loss means and what it means for this person to be dead. Don't avoid discussing death for fear they are too young to get it. Be prepared for some wonderful insights. So again, it's really important they do understand exactly what's going on for them, so they can prepare them for it, so they can understand more so and be less confused later on as they get older. And the thing is, children see life in such a magical way, it may actually really help you to talk to them and understand how they see this situation and how they see this loss that they're experiencing. It can be really, really insightful to have these conversations with children.
This slide is about how children aged 5 to 7 years understand death and things that we can do to help. So their ideas about death are developing, but still quite limited. The idea of death as a forever concept is still evolving, and the idea of their own mortality isn't really on their radar yet. They can have some confused ideas, which reflects their emerging depth of their understanding. So how we can help is by listening to their thoughts and ideas and clarify any misunderstandings. A child might have gone through a process of burying a pet, for example, in a shoebox in the garden, and then becoming really concerned about it getting dark and cold and whether their guinea pig will be scared or they'll be cold or wet. And it's trying to explain to them that their bodies don't work anymore now they've died, and so they won't feel cold and they won't have feelings. So it's trying to put a bit more detail onto what it means to be dead, and the idea about, a body being a body without feeling and without the workings of mechanical biology of things, helping it to live and to breathe and to feel and to think. And children of this age are just starting to have a little inkling about that process. So it's about trying to help them to understand that a little bit more. And as explained earlier, children will puddle jump very quickly from feeling very deep emotions and becoming, could be very, very upset and tearful, to laughing and playing and running around the next moment. So just accept these quick changes, because they are very different to how adults respond. We tend to stick with feeling or with doing tasks a lot more than what children do.
So now we're going to look at how children from 7 to 9 years understand death. So to them, death is understood as permanent. Children show some understanding of the sad emotion responses that are associated with funerals and different mourning ceremonies. They often fear about their own mortality and of those whom they love. So this is that fear of, this person's died. Does that mean I'm going to be dying? And does that mean you're going to die? And they'll start to have fears around that. Children easily identify dead and alive objects. And often there is confusion about literal or metaphorical uses of the words dead or died. So they'll start to maybe get confused if they're hearing, things, euphemisms such as, Nan's in the clouds or Granddad's gone for a long sleep. They'll start to get a bit confused between this and the concept of them being dead and died. So how to help them? We need to acknowledge feelings of worry and sadness when thinking of death, and reassure them or allow these sorts of feelings, and just keep doing regular check-ins with them for a time. So yeah, even if what they're feeling is absolutely fine, you need to let them know that that's fine to feel that. And if they're feeling angry, if they're worried, all these feelings are totally normal, and you need to make sure that they're aware that that's the case, and that it's a situation where they are going to have different heightened emotions. Answer questions as honestly as possible with reassurance that difficult feelings come and go. So again, don't feel like your children can't handle the truth when talking about death and bereavement and loss, because by trying to shield them from it, we're actually going to confuse them, and they're not finding out the answers to the questions they need and want to know, and they can handle the truth. You just have to make sure that as you're telling them these truthful things, you're reassuring them that actually it's going to be okay. You know, you may feel sad at times, you may feel fine at times. These feelings will come and go, but it's okay. It's normal. It's part of life. And we want to avoid using euphemisms. So, as I said a moment ago, things such as nan's in the clouds, granddad's gone for a long sleep, these are all things that are going to confuse them. You need to be honest with them about the fact that, you know, grandma died and she won't be coming back. We're not going to be able to see grandma again. This could be really sad. So, yeah, being really, really honest with them and making sure that we're not causing any confusion for the situation.
For older children and young people, aged 9 to 13, there is a vast expansion of understanding and they're exploring much more abstract ideas about life and death. Their curiosity is likely to be really heightened and they may have lots of questions to ask. We can help by answering honestly, giving information at the right level of their cognitive development. So, you know, if you're an adult who knows the child well, you'll know what kinds of words to use or how much information to give them that they'll be able to understand and process at a time. And generally, small bite-sized explanations that can be expanded upon over time are helpful. When we're answering questions, it's okay to do so honestly, and it's great to say, you know, I don't have an answer to that, or do you know, that's a really tricky question. I don't know what the answer is. So it's fine to say that you don't know something, and it's fine to say that you know that there isn't an answer to it, or that it's a really hard question to answer. For young people aged 13 plus, they're continuing to explore questions and events in life and death, and they're forming their own opinions and beliefs, and they may be adopting views of their family culture, or they may be trying to formulate their own. Remaining open about rites of passage and beliefs is really important. So you may ask a question, do you know what your family believe about this? Be prepared to consider and explore varying views about life and death, and some of these may challenge your own. So it's important, if you want to share, if they ask what do you think about this, it's okay if you feel comfortable to share. It's okay for you not to share if you don't want to, but it's always about remaining impartial to say, well, this is what I believe, but other people may believe other things. And what is it that you believe? What is it that you think about this? And emotion coaching as a model, as a structure for talking with children, young people and adults, as we speak about emotion coaching a lot running through the WER programme, because it helps to maintain a curious stance. So it helps us to ask questions like, well, what do you think about that? What beliefs have you had? What do your family think? What do your friends think? As young people age, they may need to revisit losses that have happened previously and to almost rewrite the story about what happened through their teen eyes as now they're older. And this is because their cognitions have moved on, they've become deeper in their thoughts, they have more awareness of what's going on in the world around them, their language and vocabulary and understanding of concepts has moved on. So they may have new questions to ask, they may need more detailed information. And giving them the information that they need or ask about at the stage, you know, at this stage, expecting sort of to add more as they grow is really helpful. So sometimes parents, you can share this information with them, because sometimes parents can be quite upset or disturbed by a child suddenly starting to ask a lot of questions, and they may feel like, oh, are they taking a step backwards? Is this something that's wrong? But it's not a step backwards. It is just acknowledging that they're growing, that their mind is growing, and that they need to grow their story at the same time. So it's really a positive step forward, that it's just showing that they're aging and they're developing. Sometimes we can hear adults comment about losses of people that they've never met. So, sometimes you might hear somebody say, well, I'm not sure why they're that distressed, because they never met their mum. Somehow assuming that you can't feel loss for something that you didn't have. And this is a really inaccurate portrayal, because actually you can feel so much loss for exactly that. You can feel loss for something that you didn't have, and you feel all the same emotions that you have with a loss of where you've had something and then you don't have it anymore. You can still feel loss over something that you haven't had. And it may be that absent parents are more fully felt in these teenage years. So it may be that the young person has lots of thoughts to try and explore and process about various losses that they've had. We've talked about creating hotspots already, but it's just another prompt for you to be aware of that. Okay, the next 3 slides we're going to look at cover what extra considerations we should be aware of when we're thinking about grief and loss with children, young people and adults who are within our school community and who may need extra support due to particular life experiences that they've had or maybe special educational needs or disabilities. So we're going to look at vulnerable life experiences, learning, particularly thinking about speech and language difficulties, but just learning difficulties generally, and autism. Just to say, there is so much to cover in this area. These slides are a really brief overview just to raise your awareness. But if you'd like more in-depth information on this and further training, then please ask your educational psychologist or give the educational psychology service an email, because this is something that we can definitely bring to your school, or to do more resources within the WER programme around this if you want to think about loss and bereavement, particularly with children and young people with special educational needs. So this slide here talks about children and people who may have social, emotional, mental health difficulties. They may have had vulnerable life experiences. For example, they may be a child in care. They may have a family that's been formed by adoption. They may have had previous bereavements in their life, or they may have experienced other various traumas or traumatic experiences that might leave them vulnerable emotionally. In the green box here, it talks about some of the things that you may see and some of the things that might happen with young people with these experiences. Sometimes when you are announcing shocking news, they can have various emotional reactions. All children can, but particularly children who have already experienced vulnerabilities in their life. Sometimes their behaviour might appear rude or insensitive. They might laugh, they might comment. This is almost like a defence mechanism, because it's starting to push some buttons that they realise might be very difficult for them to process or acknowledge, and they just kind of have this reaction to kind of protect themselves from actually connecting to the sadness or the shocking feelings that other people might be having. So something that's helpful for you to do is to think about who might be vulnerable within your school community, and to check in regularly with how they are and how they're doing. Sometimes you get parents talking and asking for advice that something shocking or a bereavement or loss can exacerbate other problems like fears or phobias or obsessions, and this is quite common too. So just acknowledging that is something that can happen, and just to reiterate the kinds of things that help to soothe the child or young person, things that help to distract them from their fears or phobias, things that help them to normalise or to be reassured with those things. They might need those things extended or expanded upon for a short while. They might be very sensitive to the emotions of others and actually experience that overwhelming in itself. So sometimes you may have a young person who's reacting really, really in a distressed way to an event that wasn't really anything to do with them, and this can be confusing to staff. Sometimes they can feel like, okay, that young person wasn't anything to do with the situation, they didn't know this person that's died, but they are hysterical about this, and can be quite perplexed as to why. And sometimes it's just because if you've suffered a lot of your own from your own life, it can be really hard for you to be around other people who are emotional, because you kind of experience that for yourself. It kind of taps into your own vulnerabilities and experience, and then you start to get upset yourself. And they may show their emotions through behaviour which is fueled by feeling distressed and being emotionally overwhelmed. And the stress response video gives a lot more information into the kind of stress response in our bodies and how this can kind of trigger off fight or flight behaviours. So remember, the key thing to do in these situations, and there's more about this in the concept index, is the 3 or 4 R's to regulation. So we start with regulating the body first. We do that through relating with the child or young person, and then later we reason, we discuss, and we think about and reflect on what happened, and then we think about what we need to do next in terms of repairing or moving forward. So regulate, relate, reason and repair, in that order, and there's more about that in the concept index. When we're thinking about considerations of how to support young people with special educational needs, particularly children with learning difficulties, I think that one of the key things is not to overlook or assume that a child won't be grieving, or just because they might not understand what's happened, that they won't actually feel the emotions linked to loss or grief. So don't ever assume that they don't need support or help or checking in. Check what their understanding is and be mindful of their emotional and cognitive levels. So it may be that you're talking to an older child, but actually thinking back to those slides we had before about what a children's understanding is at certain cognitive levels and age levels. That's not to say that those age levels are set in stone. You may have an older person, but who's got a younger cognitive ability. So you may have a 15-year-old who's actually only understanding death through the eyes of a 5 to 7-year-old. So be mindful about what level they're at and the emotional level they're at, and then use the advice for that slide to kind of think about how you would talk about the loss and grief with them and how you can be supportive. Is something about telling them in small chunks over time. You may have to repeat yourself. You may have to tell the story simply over and over again. They may ask the same question a few times. So it's just being patient with that, explaining and explaining and explaining again. And the kinds of questions that they may ask you might seem a little sometimes a bit left field. But just be patient, answer the questions as honestly as you can. And again, it's perfectly fine to say that you don't know if you're not sure about an answer to the question that they're asking. You can say, oh, I don't know the answer to that, or I can maybe try and find that out for you and come back to you, or just to say that's a question that there is not an answer to, and I don't know how to give an answer to that. Keeping your language very clear, keeping the routine going. So we talk about this idea of normality with flexibility. Thinking about upping your use of visuals, so that there may be things they already use, but just think about what they already use and in their day-to-day lives, especially around affirming the routine and any changes that might happen because of the loss. If there's anything changing going on in coming to school, or who's bringing them to school, or picking them up from school, things like that. So things they might be expecting to happen, there might be some changes to that. So using visuals, social stories, photos, visual timetables for things like that. Again, accepting that they might need to revert back to previous emotional behaviours or coping rituals or things that they might have used for comfort before. So that's perfectly fine to allow them to use what they need to do to soothe. Giving support to their understanding of their emotions, but also to the emotions of others. So explain to them, they might not be feeling upset, but why their friend might be feeling upset, or why it is that their family are upset, and just trying to think about the kind of social aspects sometimes that children need to support with. And to understand that grief can be delayed. So sometimes somebody with learning difficulties, it may take weeks or months for a reaction to kind of come out, because maybe it's just taking a lot longer for them to process, or they may go to a period of shutdown, and then actually as their mind starts to open up again, then they might start to process and to express some grief. So you might not see grief in a kind of a similar timescale to other children, young people. When we're thinking about children with autism who have experienced loss and bereavement, there are 5 main areas to think about. And again, this is just a brief overview, so please do contact your school link EP or the EPS if you'd like a more specific session going into this in more detail. Lacking of empathy and theory of mind. So children, young people can have difficulty kind of second guessing what others might be thinking or feeling. So they might know someone who's know that someone's died, but not get why people are upset, because they might not be feeling upset. So they might not have an understanding that other people can feel differently and think differently to how they are thinking. Or it is maybe that they don't understand that other people can help. So they're struggling with feeling sad or feeling overwhelmed. They may not realise that other people are thinking calmly and coherently and can actually be helpful to them. So they may need to have that explicitly explained to them. Or they may not realise that their behaviour might affect other people around them, and they may need to have that reiterated and pointed out to them that actually they need to really think about how they're behaving, because it might be upsetting other people who are feeling and feeling and thinking different things to them. So that's lack of empathy. Second one is getting the gist of things. So children and young people with autism may see little bits of life in very separate pieces of puzzle pieces, but might have trouble piecing them all together. So, for instance, they may go to visit someone in hospital. They may see them lying in a hospital bed. They may see tubes in their arms, that they're wearing night clothes. They may have a narrative that, okay, that means they're unwell. then they may see lots of people crying, and adults might assume that actually that the child would know how serious it was, or would get the gist that the person has now died because the bed is now empty, or they're no longer going to the hospital anymore. And children with autism may not connect these things together, so they need to actually have very direct and straightforward, very clear explanations, and explicit descriptions about what's happened, so that they are clear, to help them to link those pieces together. Getting the gist, they may have difficulty understanding rituals and ceremonies, so they may need to kind of have that kind of laid out in a kind of maybe social story format visually, just to try and help them understand what will be happening from the beginning, from the middle, from the end, what's expected of them, what might they see other people doing. So they may just need those things actually laid out for them, rather than expecting them to have the gist of that. They may have difficulty understanding implications on the longer term, so passage of time might be muddled. So they may understand, okay, this person has died, and so they're not here now, but they might not understand they won't be back Christmas and birthdays or next week. They may be confused around that. The third area to think about and be mindful of is around language and communication, and it kind of builds upon the things we've been talking about all the way through this session about the use of language. But they may have difficulties understanding what's happened. They might not know how to express their feelings and thoughts. They might think and speak very literally, quite matter of fact, quite blunt, and this can actually be something that other people might really struggle with, and sometimes can have quite emotive responses to children with autism, because they might ask a question in a really blunt way or make a comment, but they don't realise actually that could upset other people. Preoccupations and repetitive behaviours. So sometimes children with autism might get fixated on a specific aspect of death, and they might ask quite intrusive questions. They just become really curious. Sometimes it might be around the kind of the scientific ideas of death, or just can be quite fascinated with how that works. So they might ask kind of potentially what other people might say rude questions, like where is the body now, or does the body have a tag on its toe, or something quite explicit, something quite shocking that other people don't want to think about when they're thinking about somebody who's died. So this can lead to some quite confrontational behaviour sometimes, and can lead the children with autism to be quite vulnerable around other people, particularly their peer group. So it's really important that if a young person is fixating on that or has a lot of questions, is very curious about certain things, they have a key person that they know to go to and ask those questions of them, where they can explore and they can research and they can have their questions answered or thought about in a safe space. Otherwise it can get quite emotional in terms of the emotional responses of others. They may actually increase repetitive behaviours, and this might be a way of trying to self-soothe. One of the key losses for children with autism would be around losses of their familiar routines, of consistency, of predictability of the world around them. So they may get very rattled by changes to their day, changes to their routine and expectations, and they may need, like we said, talked about visuals and various things to help them to understand what their routine is now and what's going to happen with them in the here and now, and then tomorrow, the next day, and the next week. Imagination and time perception, planning and memory, all these cognitions can be impacted upon, and with their autism it can be very tricky for them to understand a kind of time and space. So thinking about stories, they might need that kind of again visually presented in cartoon sequences or visual ways laid out, so they have some kind of concrete visual something to help them to understand those kinds of sequencing of when and where things are going to be happening, and using again language that's very concrete. They may need a lot more help with their planning and their memory, a lot more visual things written down, so task sheets or memory sheets or things to remind them, prompt sheets, checklists. They may need a little bit more structure than usual. So that's just a very quick overview, and as we said, if you want any more, please do approach us to give you some more support with that. When we're grieving or experiencing loss, it can impact on our bodies and our cognitive abilities. It can affect the way that we feel about ourselves, and it affects the way that we view our life, kind of almost like the lens that we're looking through. We may look back over our past, we may think about our present, we may think differently about our future, and we can have lots of changes at all different levels there. It can really impact on our mind and how our abilities to work and to learn and to think. We can find it much more harder to give a good attention span to something, find it hard to concentrate. We might be more forgetful or more disorganised. We may act out of character. It can definitely affect our bodies in terms of our sleeping patterns, our appetite, how we're feeling in our bodies. We might feel emotional pain, might be experienced in terms of physical pain and discomfort. We may feel more anxious and have more anxiety. We may have upset tummies and physical illnesses. It may impact on things that we would previously do quite well. So, we may not feel like we want to do things, or we may lose some skills or find it hard to do things in our everyday life. And that can be quite disheartening and quite irritating to some people. So just reassuring people that all of these things are completely normal, and that actually, in time, these patterns will restabilize and return back to the way that it was before. Not necessarily always completely the same, because there's a whole new lens that you're looking through, but the things will settle down. Normally we say that people do this and make these readjustments with the support that they have with people around them, but sometimes people might need to seek support from other people. So it's good to reassure people, particularly parents, if parents are reporting that their children are experiencing some of these things, so that they don't think that there's something wrong with them, or that something, really is happening that's something to worry about or be concerned about. If a young person or child is acting inappropriately, be mindful that this inappropriate behaviour might be linked to grief, and explore that a little bit. And again, using emotion coaching as a model for exploring when problems occur, or just generally when talking, interacting, can be really helpful. If children, young people or adults need to revert back to kind of old comforts or old routines that are familiar to them, that they've used in the past for comfort, then that's okay to encourage that. It's a signifier that they need some extra nurture, and as they process and express their feelings, they'll be able to function without them once again in the future. So just allow them to have what they need, and then with the belief that this will right itself again in time. And you may have to encourage healthy eating routines, eating, sleeping, exercise, to keep their bodies strong. It's helpful to explain to children, young people and adults that actually, grieving is tiring, it's draining, it takes a toll on our bodies. So we need to be really sympathetic to our bodies and actually allow our bodies to fuel and to keep themselves strong in order that we can keep going day to day. And you might need to just prompt people to eat regularly. For instance, their appetite might go, their sense of time across the day might be impacted upon, so they might not realise that they ate 6 hours ago. So you might need to prompt them regularly to eat, to drink, to sleep, and they might need a little bit more structure to their day in order to do those kind of self-care routines for a while, until they're in a regular routine of being able to do that for themselves again. The WER programme, Bereavement and Other Losses presentations, are split into 4 parts to enable you to have bite-sized videos to watch. You've just been watching part 1. Why not check out the other parts 2, 3 or 4? The Thurrock COVID-19 Child Wellbeing Support Line has been set up to support children, young people, their families and school staff during the coronavirus pandemic. It is for anybody to call or email if they'd like to speak to somebody about an issue or a theme to do with wellbeing. This can be staff from school, parents and family members, young people themselves. If they call the support line number or email the helpline email, leave a message with their name and contact number, and someone from the team will call them back. There are also some other contacts here for local support services. Now we're at the end of this session, it's a good time just to check in with yourself and to see how you're feeling now. As we said in the beginning, the content of the WER programme can impact on how we're thinking and feeling and how it relates to us in our everyday lives. If you've been affected by anything you have read or heard about today, please seek support, either from your own support network, and there's some ideas listed on the slide here, or from additional support networks, whether that's local services or national sources of support. Following on from watching one or more of the videos or presentations in the WER programme, you may have questions about the content or themes from your school around wellbeing more generally. So for the Ask and Share aspect of the WER programme, we've scheduled a series of webinar conferences. These are online events, question and answer sessions that school staff or other professionals can come along to virtually and join us in a panel of people working in Thurrock. At these, questions that have been submitted can be responded to and discussed, or good practice can be shared among the schools. It may be that you want to work collaboratively as a whole staff to decide on what questions will be submitted. And more dates will be added to these conferences throughout the spring and summer term. For more information about the dates and how to book, you can check online to where the presentations are listed, or ask your school's mental health lead for more information.